I have been guilty of talking some smack about the Lizardmen on this particular channel. Yeah, although I will say in land battles, certainly their dominance is more real. They can struggle somewhat in domination based on what I've seen, but here in land battles, they definitely can be quite strong. Today we've got a face-off between two of the most powerful spellcasters in the Warhammer universe. Mazdamundi here from its current year's Lizardmen facing off against the foul horde of Kairos, Fate Weaver, Tzeentch of course. Let's take a look at the builds here. Mazda coming in with many Saurus with shields. Again, another unit that I've kind of talked some crap about, but I will say Saurus' main kind of positive attribute is their hilariously high weapon strength for the cost. Over 50 weapon strength is ridiculous. Their combat stats are not amazing in terms of attack and defense. Armor's middle of the pack too. 60's okay, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not as good as like 80 or 90, obviously, and they are quite slow, but that weapon strength can hit very hard against light units, and Tzeentch is a faction that can take a good amount of armor, but is likely to have some light units as well, so we'll take a look at that in just a second. We've got some Cold One Riders to support Colossadon Hunters, the anti-large Ripperdactyls in the air to potentially hunt Kairos. We've got some Skink Jav cohorts as well, Feral Cold Ones out on the flank here, and some regular skink cohorts in the center for Kairos Horse here. He's got Tzeentch Marauders and some Halberd Warriors up front. Halberd Warriors are pretty smart. Even the Halberd Chosen might be decent here. Even Shielded Chosen might be decent here, to be honest with you. But backed it up with some spawns. He's got plenty of blues as well for a bit of short-range shooting, and some pinks with some Furies protecting the sky. So a relatively well-balanced build for Tzeentch. Looks like some Marauder Horsemen doing some skirmishing here, and some more Marauder Spears out on the side. So a few things to consider about this matchup. First things first is the typical Tzeentchian egregious Lord sniping isn't going to be as effective. Only 25% armor piercing, or 28%, I guess, technically on the missiles themselves. On this blue fire, Mazdamundi's 130 armor and 25% missile resistance means that it's going to be mostly ineffective to shoot him with that. Instead, the blue fire is going to be sent after the Colossadon Hunters, the next most high-value target. And the Colossadons also have to be very careful of the shooting here. Now, granted, they can work around the relatively short range of the blues and pinks and try and get at Kairos, but they are going to have to be careful. Saurus also engaging in the front line. You can see initially not trading spectacularly against the Marauders, which is not why I'm not that big of a fan of them, but they will start to turn things around over time. Even in a comparison with Chaos Warriors here, 30-42 on the Halberd Warriors, and they just straight up better attack and defense than the Saurus, but of course that difference in weapon strength will potentially be quite decisive. But here the Colossadons are going to zone in, try and get after Kairos. He's going to pop a Gaze of Fate to freeze them in place, and to completely nerf their melee attack, point-blank blast from the pink horrors, the blue fire from Kairos himself, and of course now the Furies moving in for the kill. So quite a bit of value lost out on the Colossadons being hunted down. But Mazdamundi is still completely safe at this point, and the Saurus and Skinks are pushing through the front line. Blues just getting absolutely pummeled by Saurus Warriors. Blues have a lot of numbers, but they have fairly low HP per model. I'd have to actually sit down and mathematically calculate. Maybe someone in the comments can, you know, how much HP each blue horror individual model has. I'd imagine the Saurus are pretty close to one-shotting them. I don't know, actually, if they're below 50 HP per model. That'd be quite low. Maybe not that low, but still. Regardless, nice flanking attack here from its current year. The Feral Cold One's getting some great value, just shutting down those pinks momentarily. The other Feral Cold Ones, again, fire and forget mostly, but can be very cost-effective if used in the right situation. The Saurus continuing to grind here, somewhat losing against the Chaos Halberds, at least initially, but with the Skinks now victorious, they can provide a little bit of rear charge damage and start to turn that fight around with some proper support. Mazdamundi going to be dropping some nice AoE damage as well. Lack of armor piercing, anti-infantry, I mean, on the face value of it, Mazdamundi's really the only anti-infantry AP here, but definitely can be effective. I guess the Cold One Riders also in a rear charge situation could be pretty decent. Their own armor also makes them quite good against the blues and the pinks. They do a great job running around and just smashing into these units. They have been doing so far, but the Tzeentch is definitely holding. These spawns are fighting hard, smashing up the Feral Cold Ones. Where's Kairos? Looks like he tried to chase off the Colossadon Hunters, went on a little bit of a goose chase there. Boston Hunters, only 2 unit models alive. They still end up coming back from route, and I think is pretty critical for Kairos to be gone for that long. He really should have been flying about the battlefield, dropping some blue fires on the Source Warrior units, maybe the cold ones, and then dropping in for a quick rear charge for a terror route. Could probably have picked apart a few of these different pockets of lizards, but instead he's kind of leaving his forces out to dry. It looks like, I'm not sure, yeah, probably trying to zone in on Mazdamundi there, perhaps do some high value damage, but honestly at this point I think it would be in Tzeentch's best interest just to get rid of all those lizards support units and then try and focus Mazdamundi at the end, which could end up being a mistake. I mean, you don't have enough resources to kill Mazdamundi. You can't just end up wet noodling him until you die, which is definitely a problem. But here, Kairos gets netted. The 2 hero Colossadon Hunters come back from out, and they're going to duke it out, try and avenge their fallen brethren against the Fate Weaver. Looking very good up in the sky. Think sitting pretty in the back line. The Feral Cold One's in a rage. A little bit of miss micro on the Source Warriors as well as they pummel out some demonic units. But things are looking pretty good. A little bit of regrowth here on the spawn of Tzeentch. You know it's a little bit desperate when you're casting regrowth on spawn, but they still do have quite a few unit models online. They'll get quite a bit of value from that healing and just grind through the Feral Cold Ones. But I mean, spawn only have 10 armor, so even against the Saurus, they are going to somewhat struggle. And, yeah, it's an interesting matchup for sure. You know, Mazdamundi's armor and, again, his missile resistance, his huge amount of HP as well makes him tough for Tzeentch to snipe. Yeah, I almost would think that Tzeentch might want to approach this in more of a classic Warriors of Chaos, maybe even take Lore of Metal, honestly, for Overcast, Plague of Rust. Really try and burst Mazdamundi down by removing his armor. Likewise, I like the pick of Kairos to a high degree, but I really think in matchups where you might be forced to fight something big and scary in melee, and this is definitely one of them, I think the Exalted Lord of Change is probably a better choice, even though he's slightly more expensive base cost than Kairos. Doesn't have quite the same absurd magic potential, still very strong. Of course, you can take Lore Metal. You can also take the Fury Summons, which would have been super useful here to chase off those Colossadon Hunters rather than having to allocate Kairos himself, right? Yeah, Kairos also using the regrowth to decent effect, but has not been able to get rid of these 2 Colossadon Hunters who are themselves eating apotheoses anyway. Cold-blooded as well. Keep their leadership intact, and they're going to continue just dealing a little bit of DPS on Kairos, not allowing him to get his barrier replenished, which is super important in this kind of a late game grind here. You can see the Tzeentchian forces trying to kite as best they can, trying to get these Lizardmen spread apart as much as possible, utilize those missile units and cycle charging from Kairos. But instead, we're going to see a net and banishment. Oh yeah, beautiful combination on these Tzeentch warriors, getting banished back to the Shadow Realm. Oh man, this game is amazing looking. Yes, fantastic. And the follow-up charge from the Skinks, just to really put the nail in the coffin. I mean, imagine that you're a Tzeentchian warrior, you've been serving the Lord of Change for really an immeasurable amount of time. Like, you're not really sure if it's been forever or if it's been for literally 2 seconds. But regardless, you find yourselves in the plains of Cathay for whatever strange reason, and then some fat toad on a dinosaur nets you and banishes you into the Shadow Realm. So there you go. Oh man, things are looking pretty good for Lizardmen. Its current year, kind of keeping its forces nice and tight to Mazdamundi. Few scattered, isolated units out here getting blasted by Kairos are going to make their final sacrifice, but even still, Saurus getting into contact with these pink horrors, and we'll have to check the Saurus value at the end of the day. This is definitely a good showcase of them just as like a regular mainline infantry unit. They were able to tank damage, they were able to deal some damage, grind through as you would need them to. Sort of as a, not heavy armor infantry, but a heavy mass infantry, right? They're taking the role of heavy infantry, certainly. Here, this unit gets terrified away, but we'll fast forward a little bit as Kairos makes his final stand here with his last unit of pinks. They're going to get some barrier replenishment, cast a few foul spells, but I mean, Mazdamundi's sitting, yeah, over 8,000 HP. And still some ammunition left on his Howdah as well, so they'll be able to come in and provide a little bit of poison. And that's another thing people forget is just like with against Nurgle, you are very likely to have almost your entire army poisoned when you're fighting the Lizardmen. It's just kind of the way of things, especially when they bring dinos like this that have the Howdahs in the back. They can just broadcast poison damage across large areas. Ends up proving very effective. Ozymundi finally moving in for the kill, supporting his Saurus and his Cold Ones. Nice net on Kairos, and oh yeah, here we go, big boy. Nope, just kidding. Tzeentch player gonna end that scheme real quick. So there you go. Thanks to its current year for sending that one in. Love to see me some Ozymundi desolation of Tzeentch. Absolutely spectacular. 300 kills. 23,000 damage dealt, almost 2,000 damage value. I mean, Ozymundi didn't quite pay for himself technically, but he tanked out so much damage, and he survived until the late game, dished out a ton too. So tactically, I would say absolutely super useful. And the Colossedon Hunters really surprised me, I have to say. Despite getting crippled down to 2 models, they still managed to come back and contribute a non-trivial amount of value in terms of dealing HP damage to Kairos and just kind of forcing the engagement, you know, in awkward ways. Rest of the army here, Cold One Riders do okay. Again, none of the Saurus actually end up paying for themselves, but in terms of that main line infantry role, they survive, they grind through. Tactically, they do what you need them to. The Cold One Clever Girls here, the Feral Cold Ones, also, again, not too expensive. They don't quite end up paying for themselves, but pretty close at the end of the day. And then Skink Infantry, if used correctly, can be great. Their leadership is quite poor, but that high speed makes them ideal for chasing enemy infantry units once they are broken. And certainly they're great support units for the rest of Lizardmen's roster. For Tzeentch here, I mean, obviously Kairos, a little bit of a fail burger, but it's pretty rare that that will happen. He is somewhat squishy, you have to use him correctly, but like I said, I think this is one matchup where there's a few things you can do, you know. Back in my day, nope, not that. Yeah, I mean, if I were to think about playing this more like a classic Warriors of Chaos style, and maybe go with, Lore of Metal. So you've got Sarthrel that could take Lore of Metal. His ability set's okay, but in general, I'm a huge fan of the summon from the Exalted Lord of Change, so I'd come in here, make sure I've got that. Searing Doom, I consider keeping that, but definitely Plague of Rust and Final Transmutation. Plague of Rust just to increase the damage of shooting units all across the field here. On high-value targets, definitely hang on to Great Arcane Conduit just in case. Metal Shifting, maybe not. But sort of the old-school way, right? And it doesn't work quite as efficiently because everything's just a little bit more expensive on Tzeentch's roster. But like a couple of spawns for additional armor sundering. And then we come in here and grab some Marauders for support. The old way I used to do this was actually with Shielded Chosen. Again, this is not particularly cost-efficient because Tzeentch is what it is, right? It's a little bit tricky to actually find the funds to do something effective. This army's way too small, I think. Maybe it would actually work, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I actually haven't played this matchup as much from this side to try out this sort of old-school Warriors of Chaos type build. Of course, there's other, like, strange melee builds you can do with Tzeentch, right? Taking the Cultist with spells, taking no spells on the Exalted Lord of Change, trying to get a lot of value from Kindle Flame, or a lot of value from the item here, which is Wand of Whimsy, plus 12 melee attack, 12% base weapon damage. Can be quite good, but it's a little bit tricky. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, though. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.